everyone, I'm Mrs. B and this is Art Life. Today come with me and I'll show you how to create a fantastic self-portrait using some organic shapes and influence from the artist Henri Matisse. Now today I'm going to read you a fantastic book all about how Matisse used to create shapes. This book is called Matisses Garden and I'll read it to you next. Then I'll show you how to create a collage and painting influenced by his work. Come with me, let's have a go. What you'll need for our collage task today is some white paper. You'll need some colour paper to cut and paste as well. You'll need some glue and scissors to cut and paste with, and some watercolours to do some painting later. I have a list of some fantastic materials below in the description if you'd like to follow that link to get a discount code to buy some materials for yourself. Let's get started. Now, before we start our Matisse-inspired portrait, we're going to have a read of a wonderful book by Samantha Freeman. It's called Matisses Garden. One day, the artist Henri Matisse cut a small bird from a piece of white paper. It was a simple shape, but he liked the way it looked and he didn't want to throw it out. So he pinned it to the wall of his apartment to cover up a stain. The bird seemed lonely by itself, so Matisse cut out more shapes, which joined the bird on the wall. As he cut shape after shape from the white paper, he thought about a trip that he had taken years before to an island called Tahiti. The shapes looked like the birds, fish and seaweed he had seen there. As his scissors glided through the paper, he thought about how a bird must feel when it flies. As he cut, Matisse felt like he too was flying. Soon his walls were covered with plant and animal shapes. They captured the feeling of soaring and the sensation of swimming, but they didn't convey the bright blue of the sky or the deep blue of the sea. So he made a new work, this time pinning his white forms to sheets painted marine blue. When he saw how the colour brought the shapes to life, he asked his assistants to paint sheets of paper in a range of shades from vermilion to lemon to violet. Instead of using only white paper, he decided he would make his shapes by cutting directly into colour. He tried a pink leaf against a background of orange and a green leaf against a background of black. Backgrounds of every shade experimenting with different harmonies and contrasts, the way the colours played with and against each other. What counts most with colours are relationships, Matisse thought. Matisse cut and cut. The leftover paper fell to the floor. He realised that every shape he cut created another shape. Instead of throwing away the leftover pieces, he added them to the composition. They weren't leftovers at all. Sometimes the shapes he cut were simple, like squares. He composed his shapes to show familiar scenes like a woman in a room with a vase of flowers. And he turned familiar objects into simple forms, which he then composed into patterns. His cutouts started very small and got larger and larger, and then large as a wall. Until they stretched across the walls of his studio, curving around corners and covering doors. Matisse realised happily, I have made a little garden around me where I can walk. And for his garden, Matisse cut a small bird from a piece of blue paper. The end. Now, let's use Matisse as inspiration for our artwork today. The first thing we're going to do for our Matisse-inspired artwork today is create a bit of a collage for our background using some coloured paper. And we're going to have a go at creating some organic shapes. As you would have noticed in the book I just read, Matisse absolutely loved creating really interesting shapes through wobbly lines, just like this. Okay. Now today we're going to be doing some different type of shapes than what might come to mind when you think of the word shape. You might consider some geometric shapes, things like circles, squares and triangles. These are the types of shapes we learn about in maths, and they're called geometric. But Matisse loved a different type of shape. He loved shapes that were more random and wobbly and interesting. But because a shape is literally just a closed line like that, we can make our shapes as random and interesting as we want. These type of shapes are called organic shapes, and they're the ones we're going to focus on today. So we're going to use a pencil just to draw something interesting. It might look like a leaf, might look a bit wobbly like this, as I said. And we're going to take some time now to cut some really interesting organic shapes and paste them onto our white backing piece of paper here. So I find drawing the shape can make it a lot easier first. So if you'd like to do that, you can. Otherwise, you can just have a go at cutting some neat, interesting shapes and placing them down onto your background. Remember when cutting though, even though we're being random, it doesn't mean we're being messy. So you can see that the lines that I'm cutting are still as neat as I can. I'm using my line that I've drawn as a bit of a guide and using Matisse's shapes as a bit of inspiration for mine as well. That one looks cool. So feel free to mix up all the colours that you might have. Remember, if you sort of cut messy like this, then your artwork will probably look messy too. So really take your time, and you can see that while random, it's still as neat as possible. It'd be great if you can come up with your own shape, one that I maybe haven't shown you, and maybe one that Matisse hasn't shown you, so that you can use your creativity during this task as well and come up with something new. Sometimes it's also really cool to use the scraps or the other part of the artwork, just like Matisse did, and create an artwork out of the remnants. Remember, today we're trying to avoid shapes that we know. You can place in some geometric shapes if you want to, but this task really is sort of meant to be inspired by Matisse, and so try your best to come up with some new kind of random shapes. These ones are kind of more fun anyway to create out of your paper. That one looks like a splatter of paint. So this one, I used the line I'd already cut and created another part out of it. I think that's probably enough shapes that I've cut now. So the next step is to take some time to use your glue stick to stick everything down nice and flat onto your white piece of paper. I'm working on an A3 size, so it's a good size to work on, nice and big. And I'm gonna just start by sticking things down randomly. There's no real procedure to this part. It's just where you think things might look nice, but please make sure that when you're sticking things down that they are nice and flat. So that means not just using a little bit of glue and saying that'll do. You can see that it'll just flop up and we won't be able to do the next step very well. So using lots of glue, getting right to the edges, just like this, placing it down neatly and flattening it with your hand will make sure that it sticks nice and flat to the paper. Might be an idea to have a scrap piece of paper so that you can get right to the edges without ruining your white piece. Now, what I've accidentally done with this piece of paper is that I've put glue on the wrong side. So it's much neater with your artwork to not show any grey lead marks. So what I suggest is that you actually put the glue on the side with the grey lead so that the side that's showing is nice and neat. Unfortunately, I can't use this one anymore because there's glue on the wrong side. Now you might notice that I'm actually starting to layer some of my coloured card pieces. That just means sticking some things over the top of other things. It's a great strategy when doing collage. Just sort of gives it a bit of extra interest, can see, rather than keeping everything separate. Now this is a fantastic art task for young students because it gets them to not only practice their cutting and pasting skills, it makes them arrange things in a nice, neat way. It makes them consider composition as a whole, and it also teaches them about a wonderful artist, Henri Matisse. So just make sure that everything's stuck down nice and flat, getting right to the corners. And we're ready for our next step. So, the next thing we're going to do with our Matisse style artwork today is adopt another type of art that he used to do, and that is create portraits using thick, black, bold lines. Just like you can see in these examples here, he wouldn't go overboard with detail. He will just suggest different facial features like the nose, just as one line, and it was really quite simple, the type of portraits that he used to create with just black paint. So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to use watercolours today, just simply because it's less messy than acrylic paint, but of course if you want the portrait to really stand out, I suggest using some black acrylic. Now, you may also use a thick black Sharpie if you have that at home and you don't have any paints. It will still have the same effect. So you might notice I'm getting a lot of black on my brush here. I want this line to be really dark and stand out quite a lot. So, might be a bit scary just to paint directly on top of our beautiful collage here, but you need to trust yourself and take your time. So, the idea is to just do a face. Today I'm going to do a self-portrait, so I'm going to think of what my face looks like, and you might choose to do a self-portrait as well. So, I'm just going to focus mainly on the face, the neck and the shoulders. And I'm going to do a large U shape. Now you might recognize now it's so important that all of our collage pieces were stuck really flat down onto our page, because if they were sticking up, painting now would be even trickier. So I've done my U shape and that's suggesting my face. Now I'm just going to use one line to suggest my nose, but I'm actually going to bring it from here. And then I'm going to go down. There. So that actually suggests a bit of an eyebrow as well. So I'm going to do the other eyebrow over here. As you see in Matisse's examples, he did not overthink it. He did not stress out about the lines he was using. He was quite simple. So when I do the eye, I'm literally just going to do one more curved line here and then a black circle, and I'm going to do a similar thing on the other side. For my lips, I'm just going to do a simple wobbly line like this. Obviously yours can look a little bit different to mine. This is just a guide as to how to paint a portrait just like Matisse did. Remember, still getting a lot of black on your brush. All right, with the hair, I'm not going to do individual strands of hair because that will probably make our artwork look quite messy. I'm going to consider the way my hair falls as a line, one line only. So I have a middle part that comes like this. It comes down in front of my face. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Obviously, if you have a different style hair, you might consider how your hair sits on your forehead. And now the top of my head, I'm going to bring a line all the way down. I have long shoulder length hair. See, my line is getting a little bit interrupted here, so I'm just going to go back over and make sure it's a nice bold line over the top of my paper. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now, if you make a mistake, remember, and I've said this in a lot of my other videos, and I always say this to my students in my classroom, if you make a mistake, try your best to please turn it into a masterpiece. That means if I've made a mistake here and, I can't just cross it out. I can't rub out a black line of paint, so I have to try to turn it into something that maybe was meant to be there in the first place. So the viewer might not even know really. So there, that's my hair. You can just sort of suggest a neckline and shoulders as well, just with simple sort of gestured expressive lines. Like that, give yourself something to wear. And you may add in other details to make it more personalized as you wish. So for example, if you wear glasses, you might add in a line to show your glasses. You might add details to your clothing to make it a bit more interesting and personalized. But for the most part, this is sort of the type of painting, the type of portrait that Matisse would actually do himself. So once you've finished, you can sign your name in the corner and be very proud of your beautiful artwork. So it's as simple as that. I really hope you've enjoyed learning all about Henri Matisse today, had a go at cutting out some really fantastic and interesting organic shapes, and also tried painting your very own self-portrait using watercolours. Please make sure you subscribe below for any future videos, and make sure you like and comment, and have a great day.